Hello and welcome to the latest edition of What Does the Giraffe Say Media with me, Kathleen Ritorne. We are an organisation that aims to connect people with conservation efforts around the world by holding live interviews on social media. Today, I am very happy. I am joined by Robin Cook, and he is the project manager for Big Trees at Elephants Alive. So, Robin, if I could hand over to you, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and why you're so passionate about conservation.
Hi, Kathleen. Thanks so much, and thanks so much for having me on this. I come from a scientific background with Elephants Alive and doing research for them. So I'm one of those classic case scenarios where you grow up and your parents take you through to the Kruger Park and you get exposed to wildlife and conservation at a very young age. And I always knew that I wanted to be in that career somewhere along the line, and I wanted to be out in the Kruger Park side, which is in the far northeast of South Africa. And it was really just keeping my head down and saying yes to things. So I knew I wanted to be here. And it was when I found out, watching a documentary, a man appeared speaking about crocodiles, and underneath him it said zoologist. And I thought, that sounds like a really fascinating career. What does a zoologist even do? So I Googled it and I realized you had to study and you got a degree in it. And so applied at the end of school to do a zoology degree and haven't stopped. I'm in the middle of a PhD now and loving the journey. And thank goodness it's taken me to exactly where I want to be, which is the Kruger Park.
I love that. I mean, I'm very lucky. I've spent some time in the Kruger Park and it's an absolute stunning place. So you're very lucky indeed. So as I mentioned at the start, you are now the Big Trees project manager for Elephants Alive. Can you talk to us a little bit about the organisation and its ethos, which is basically based around bees, trees, elephants and people?
So Elephants Alive started in 2004 with Dr. Michelle Henley, who's our director and principal researcher, and Miss Marlene McKay, who was a trustee from Save the Elephants based up in Kenya. But Michelle had actually been working in the Kruger system, or the private system of Kruger, which we call the Associated Private Nature Reserves, a little bit earlier, where she was doing her PhD and working with her mom. And the two of them would be recording the IDs of elephants, so drawing their ear patterns and getting to know the individuals on a more individual basis. And that's where Michelle's background came. She was doing a PhD. She finished that in 2004. And so working together with Marlene, they started what was called Save the Elephants South Africa. And Save the Elephants South Africa is now transitioned into Elephants Alive, but it's been operating now for close on to 2 decades in this region, where they focus on looking at elephant behavior and ecology, but as well as promoting harmonious coexistence with humans. So it goes from a science basis through to education, through to actually looking at ways that we can promote that coexistence instead of looking at conflict. And we've got elephants that are collared. That's part of our tracking project. So we're tracking elephants from South Africa into Mozambique, into Zimbabwe, and looking at how they move, where they move, and why they move. And we still run that ID project, which is incredible after almost 2 decades. So we've got an amazing array of elephants where we're able to scientifically actually look at who associates with who the popular elephants, who the not so popular elephants. And it really allows you to learn more about them on an individual basis. And then there's the tree projects. So that's where I come in, and it's looking at how elephants modify their environment. So they are mega herbivores. They have a large impact, particularly on large tree species. And so what I look at is how they're impacting trees, which trees are being impacted. And then when you've got iconic trees, or a tree, let's say, that has a vulture nest in it, how are elephants affecting that, and how can we protect certain trees? And then the bees come in from there, because they are one of the mitigation methods I look at.
And so if people are back home are watching this and they're thinking, okay, what does bees have to do with elephants? Can you talk to us about what that process is, how it even came about, and how successful it is?
Okay, great. So I'll firstly go into elephants and bees themselves. And it sounds really strange because we're talking about a creature that's so small being used to scare off a creature so large. And the number one question I get is, but elephants are thick-skinned, so how does it work? Now, the way that it works is, although they're thick-skinned creatures, they've got 3 sensitive or vulnerable spots on their bodies. And it's the eyes and the ears where any sting that's going to hurt, and then the trunk, which has moisture inside. So if bees get into there and they sting the trunk, it's going to be a major problem for the elephant as well. So Dr. Lucy King, who's from Save the Elephants up in Kenya, actually did this as her PhD, where she was looking at the biology behind elephants and bees. And she was able to show that you could play the sounds of buzzing bees to elephants, and they would stop what they were doing and they lift their head and there's a shake and the trunk is up and they would move off. But she also found that they were releasing a unique rumble sound, and she could actually record that rumble sound and play it to other elephants that weren't exposed to that original buzzing sound. And you got the same behavior of this head coming up and shaking and moving off. So there seemed to be some sort of fear that these elephants had of bees, and she used that to create what is called beehive fences. So you've got these beehives connected to one another on wires around a crop field. And as your elephant comes to crop rate, it touches the wire and your hive starts to sway and your bees come out. And when we're dealing with African honeybees, they're notoriously aggressive. And I can promise you from field experience, they're terrifying. So when they're chasing an elephant, it's going to be a lesson the elephant doesn't forget. And then that elephant hopefully passes it down to the rest of its group. And so it's worked really well for Lucy and her project with protecting crops. Now, to bring it to South Africa, it's a little bit of a different situation where we have our elephants in fenced off reserves. So they're not actually going out and they're not crop raiding per se, but they're having an impact on the environment. And it's what we call a mild form of human-elephant conflict, because you actually then get animosity towards elephants because of the impact on the environment, certain iconic tree species going down, and concern over how that could affect biodiversity. So we wanted to look at ways as Elephants Alive that we could, again, promote that harmonious coexistence and look at mitigation methods. So how can you protect your tree itself from an elephant? And so Michelle started to look at the idea of using beehives after what Lucy had been doing in Kenya. And the two of them became my supervisors for my master's project back in 2015. And that's where we started exploring, can we put hives in the iconic Marula tree, which I'm sure people have heard of. It's where the Marula comes from, the drink. And could we protect such a tree from elephants using bees? And so that project's now been running for 5.5 years to test that.
And why is it so important to protect these trees? I mean, you touched on it earlier. Is it purely a case of biodiversity?
So the Marula tree itself is a keystone species, an umbrella species. It's an important food source, firstly, and so a lot of animals are feeding off it. It's a nesting site for a variety of creatures, all from your birds all the way down to your mosquitoes. They're using that tree species as well. The fruit it provides is important food for a variety of species, not just your herbivores. And then culturally, the fruit is used for making Marula beer. It's used for your Amarula liqueurs. And so there's a whole lot of uses that this tree has. Now, when we're trying a mitigation method on it, we know that elephants love the tree. It's one of those real top priority foods for the elephant, as in if that's there, they're going to go for it. So from a scientific point of view, it really tests your method. If you can protect a tree that is so popular to the elephant, then you know you've got yourself a method that's going to work really well on other tree species. Important to note, though, we're never taking away the food source of the elephants. We're talking about a handful of trees amongst thousands, but it's to really protect those iconic ones where you might have something nesting in it, or it's just one of those real important sources of seed. So your female Marula tree, it's a seed bank. And so you really do want to protect those. And the bees have been one of the methods we've tried.
And did you have to research and find out if there were certain bees that the elephants will respond to, as their different ones have different effects on the elephants?
So firstly, we had to learn how to become beekeepers, because we came from a purely elephant background. And all of a sudden you're dealing with an insect, and a very complex insect. There's just so much that we don't know about bees, especially when we started the project. There is There's the African honeybee, which is our main bee species here, and it goes from here all the way up to Kenya. It's the same species that Lucy and her team are using. So it's the natural bee occurring in the area. We do have a Cape honeybee, but that's down in the Cape region of South Africa and geographically separate from our African honeybee. So it's the really aggressive one we're using. It naturally occurs here, and you can actually put hives out, and as long as they're clean, you can even attract wild swarms to your project. So we had to do beekeeping courses. We had to learn how to deal with bees. I never knew bees have personalities. And we learned that also the hard way, where you get some hives which are really sweet and some hives which are a bit of a nightmare. And that goes down to your queen's genetics. If you've got an angry queen, you've got an angry colony. They're all her daughters. And if you've got a really nice queen, you've got a nice colony. So because of that, we actually have our hives named, normally by whoever sponsors them. But it allows us to almost interact on the hive as an individual basis. I know that brown family is a nightmare. So when I walk up to brown family,
Oh, we seem to have had a bit of a pause with Robin's connection. Hopefully he'll be able to. Yeah, you're back. Yep. So you were saying about the brown family of bees.
I just said, so you can go, for example, to brown family and know that you're in for a difficult afternoon, and then go to another one who you know are always sweet, and they'll normally be sweet. So it's been really fascinating to get to know the bees on an individual basis and not just as a species.
I mean, this for me is completely new knowledge. I love that. I think that's so fascinating. I have to find out, have you had any, obviously you're saying you might have a nightmare day. What sort of experiences have you had with the bees, and how do you get away from bees that want to attack?
So firstly, people love to ask, I do a lot of my field work with elephants alive on foot. And the main question is, what's the most dangerous thing you've come across? Like, what's tried to kill you out there? And I say to them every time, it's the bees, without a doubt. They are far more terrifying than any elephant or buffalo I've bumped into, because they really do just go after you and they chase you. So I remember a situation taking a staff member to the field, and a hive had fallen out a tree after a heavy, windy night. And this poor hive was face down, the entrance into the ground, and I could just hear this continual buzzing of the bees in the inside, and I knew they were going to be mad when I lifted them. So we suited up, and I just told my staff mate, like, just be prepared, this is it. And as you open, and all I want to do is pop them back in the tree, I'm trying to help. My goodness, did I get a rude awakening from these bees, of this anger, that explosion that came out. And I hung them and then got chased 300 meters as a thank you. So they really do test us, and then you go running through the bush in your bee suit, forgetting that you're in Big Five territory. But I always tell myself, if I bump into an animal, they're probably going to run as well, because of all the bees surrounding me. So they also, we do give them a little bit of food in the winter to sustain them. And then I learn just how they associate my presence with food, which I find really fascinating. So at the moment, we're in our feeding season. And once a week, I give them a bit of supplementary pollen and nectar just to maintain their colony levels, because the elephants are feeding on the trees in your winter. So you want strong bees. And I'll arrive, and it's almost like when you get home and you're calling your dog to feed it, they start to buzz around me, but no aggression. They know I've got the food in my hand, and they start going and sitting on the little ice cream container I'm carrying, and they wait. And as soon as you pour it out, they swarm over there, couldn't care less that you're there, and they're just getting their food. So I also find that really fascinating, how they're associating beekeeper presence with the resource or the reward they're getting.
I can imagine. I mean, it's such a complex environment, and there's all these different things that come into it. I find it so interesting. And so when you're putting up these hives, are these done at local reserves, or how does that work? I understand you work with community stakeholders, for example.
So we're working in the private sector of the Kruger National Park, and the main study site is at a place called Jajani Private Nature Reserve, which is in Beekeeping Game Reserve itself. And this is a shareholder block which opened up to the Kruger in 2013. And they hadn't had elephants for over 100 years. So this place had an amazing array of Marula trees, very high density. So you could almost imagine them dropping their fences. It's like opening up a candy store to kids. The elephants are so excited. There's so many marulas for them to come for. So it was an ideal study site for us to set up our experiments and put the bees in the trees over there. So we then working with the shareholders, and a lot of them are brilliant with sponsoring the hive. So it was great to get community buy-in where they're sponsoring their own hives to protect the trees within their reserve. I then keep a relationship with them as to how are their bees doing, how are their trees doing, and then there's the honey that comes from the hives at the end of the day, and that goes towards the lodges and towards the general tourists of the Kruger section. So it's allowed the project to move from protecting the tree itself to actually generate its own income to keep itself going.
And then is there such thing as a typical day for you then? What kind of work do you do on a daily basis?
So I was thinking of this question, and I think my last 3 days sums up why there's no such thing as a typical day, because I've gone from doing a first aid course on Thursday. Yesterday I was feeding bees, got stung on the forehead as a thank you. And then today I was out tracking an elephant. So it really does change every day, every week, which it makes it a very exciting job. But primarily what I'm responsible for are the big tree projects. So it's running general surveys on the trees to see how the elephants are impacting them. Elephants Alive have been running a vulture tree study since 2008. So we're looking at how are elephants affecting trees that vultures are nesting in. So that happens once a year. And then there's all our mitigation methods. So there's bees, there's rocks that we put around trees, chicken mesh to stop the elephants bark stripping the trees. So there's a lot of field work that goes in. There's a lot of data processing and analyses, report writing, scientific paper writing, conferences. But it's all very exciting because I love the fact that I get to be on the ground collecting the data and then be the person at the end of the day presenting it at a conference on behalf of Elephants Alive. So I think it's really fulfilling to be out in the field and to be then in front of the computer. Luckily, I like both, so it's not too bad when I've got these laptop days. But I'm very grateful that I get to have such a mixed career, which keeps it very exciting.
I mean, as you kind of touched on a bit earlier, and again there, I mean, there's a lot of science and data that goes into your role in your day-to-day life. And also the fact that you're collaring these elephants. I mean, collaring an elephant is a lot of work, it's a lot of expense. Why is it so important? What do you get from that?
So Elephants Alive have in our entire database about 50 odd elephants at the moment that have collars on across the Kruger Park, within the private sector, and in Mozambique. And these collars allow the elephants to tell us their stories, which I think is amazing. So we can ask various questions based on their movements. Where do they move across seasons? How does rainfall affect their movement? Vegetation types, but also very importantly in Mozambique, how do they move when there's conflict with humans or when there's poaching events? And to open up pathways. So these, especially our young bulls, they're the young explorers, and they want to show us where we've put fences up or where we might be putting fences down. Where do the elephants want to move? And then how can we accommodate that to create these pathways that link systems? So we create mega parks for these elephants. And in the same way, you're protecting that habitat the elephants are moving through, but you're protecting everything within that habitat by doing so. So I think it's brilliant that the elephants can have these collars on because they just really tell us their stories, and we can make management plans around what the elephant wants to do.
And as well, we were talking earlier, and you were talking about how people would also be IDing the elephants by their ears and markings and things such as that. Why is the individual elephant important?
Why is the individual elephant important? Great question. And I think it first comes down to our ethos of every elephant counts. So I think when we look at South Africa's elephants, we should firstly look at it as a major success story. About 100 years ago, we had little to no elephants in this country. They'd been wiped out. They weren't around anymore. The Kruger system was basically vacant. And we've managed to get to the situation where we can even dare say we've got no room for elephants within our protected areas. And I think that's amazing to show the conservation that we've done, that we've been moving elephants to new parks. We've been looking at trans-frontier parks for our elephants. And so I think firstly, it's important that we celebrate how well we've done for elephant conservation. Then it's important that we protect elephants because of them being keystone species. They have such an impact on the environment in the sense that they open up vegetation. And so they, particularly with our CO2 levels increasing, there's a lot of bush thickening that happens. And elephants are the number one gardeners that you can have in a system to open it up. They're amazing at moving seeds around. So they can collect seeds at a Marula tree, and our research has shown up to 65 kilometers they can transport that seed. So they're busy moving seeds about, they're moving nutrients against the gradient. So instead of nutrients being saturated and leaching down, elephants then go upwards and defecate. And so they're moving your nutrients around as well. So they're having such an important impact on the environment, which is why we call them a keystone species. And then as an umbrella species, as I mentioned earlier, you protect elephant and you protect the environment around it and everything within it. So they're very important for bringing in funds, but the funds aren't necessarily for them alone. It's the environment they operate within.
Yeah, I find that so interesting. We've had a comment come through from Gentle Giants. Hi to them. They were actually on the show a couple of weeks back. They do a lot of work with animals and elephants in Asia. Would the same sort of process work well for Asian elephants?
With the bees?
Yes.
Great question. And luckily I have a little bit of experience on that because I went to go work in Sri Lanka under Lucy King's project back in 2017. And I was doing research under the PhD student Kylie Butler. And she had set up a whole lot of beehives around fences over there. And what was fascinating with Sri Lanka is they've got these massive rice fields. So you can't have these big beehive fences around rice fields. It's just too big. So there we were actually using the beehives to protect the individual farmer's house and their fruiting trees within. So it was my first time moving away from tree research into actual human-elephant conflict, where I had gone from a control tree gets knocked over and I almost celebrate because it's great data. That's not the bee tree. Now a control farm gets crop raided and there's no such feeling because of celebration, because this person's lost half their livelihood in a single night. So it was a very growing experience for me because I'd never actually dealt with the human issue before. The Asian honeybee worked for sure it worked. It was just very different versus the African honeybee because they're not as aggressive. So I remember my field assistant Sapun opening up that first hive and I ran because I thought he's crazy, like you don't just open up a hive when we're not suited. And he looked at me confused and he showed me that you could take the frames out, look at the bees, and as long as you didn't disturb them, they were okay. So there was honey for the farmers, yes. There was a barrier around their fence. It just wasn't as aggressive as our African ones. However, saying that, Antoinette van der Water from Bring the Elephants Home in Thailand, over there, they naturally are using the European honeybee. It just occurs there, and it is more aggressive than the Asian honeybee. And I think their results have been better. And she's even got a design with her hive that when it's disturbed, the lid pops up open. So your bees are right there in the elephant's face. So I think it's certainly working well in Thailand. Sri Lanka, a little less, but it was a good barrier at the end of the day.
Awesome. Thank you. So there you go, Diane and Colby. You can have a chance for doing that with your elephants in Thailand. As you were talking earlier, you come from a science background. You're very lucky that you're actually managing to work in the field and even down to the location that you're in love with. What if someone's watching this and wants to follow in your footsteps? What advice would you give them? And is there anything you know now that you wish you'd known at the start?
So when I trace back, there was no simple pathway that got me to where I am. There was very much luck and saying yes at the right time, which I'm very grateful for. So, for example, I ended up at Elephants Alive by being a third-year student trying to find an honors project. And I just chose my favorite supervisor at the university. And it just so happened that Professor Perini was working with a Dr. Michelle Henley on Kruger elephants. And I just saw Kruger elephants. That project looks fascinating, applied. Luckily got it, and the rest is history, because that allowed me to develop a relationship with Elephants Alive, working under Dr. Henley herself, and just so lucky that that day I saw that project and said yes. So I think it's very important to put yourself out there. Even if you're not doing anything for money yet. My first few times at Elephants Alive were all internships, unpaid internships, but it allowed me to get into the field, work out if I wanted this life or not, because it's your Instagram might be filled with amazing photos of you and elephants and you and bees, but there's hard work behind the computer. There's politics involved. There's the isolation. You certainly don't see your friends and family as much as you might want to. And so it allows you to at least be in a different environment and work out if it is the career for you. And by being in that different environment, you start to make connections elsewhere. And I think in conservation, it's so often who you know that will get you to where you want to be. So you just need to be bold and say yes to an opportunity that comes to really get there.
I completely agree. I'm exactly the same ethos. The worst anyone can ever say is no. So it's always good if you're watching back home to just put yourself out there, because you never know what's around the corner. And actually that fits quite nicely into a comment that we got from Megan Frayne. And they're asking, do Elephants Alive do internship students?
We are working on that. At the moment, we've been very picky because we just don't have the setup yet for such a program. We do have individual projects we look at, and we do send out forms, and we look at someone's background and exactly what they've done and do they fit into that project. But I think in due course, people must just keep following our website. That will come eventually.
Excellent. I'm just going to pull up the website there. So if you're watching back home, there you go. There is the website. So we're having lots of lovely comments coming through as we're talking, Robin. People are very supportive of the work you're doing. If you are watching this, please do like, comment and share. The more people who see this, the more people can get awareness of the incredible work that they are doing. So touching on the fact that obviously you have a business in COVID times, how has that impacted the work that you're able to do, and how can people support the work that you're doing?
So COVID was tricky in this area because, of course, we went into very hard lockdowns at first, and then the reserves were closed for a long time. So there was a good few months where we couldn't actually get into the field at all. I went through 2 and a bit months of not seeing my bees because I literally just was either stuck in Johannesburg or the reserves weren't open yet, understandably, but of course it takes a knock. COVID then, the COVID lockdowns, the hard lockdowns finished, and we had Tropical Cyclone Eloise come through. And that was hectic on the site because these were winds that we had never experienced since the project started, and poor bees got flung out of trees, and there was a lot of impact that happened there. So we're in a rebuilding stage right now. So I think from the Big Trees point of view, I'm certainly looking for sponsorship for beehives to get it back up to where we want, where we've got a nice fair landscape within our study setup, that when the elephants come, they're exposed to bees and not just boxes. I think that's important. And so I'm certainly looking for more sponsorship. And what we do with our sponsors is you get your name on the hive with our logo. And I stay in contact with you, as I mentioned earlier, as to how your bees are doing and how your tree is doing. So I think if people contact us through our website, that would be amazing. But then from Elephants Alive's point of view, and this is maybe directed more to our South African audience, we have the My School card, which is if you go to your Woolworths for shopping, that brings in amazing unrestricted income into the project, where it goes from helping with a beehive to fuel to just allowing us to do our general out and about work. So that unrestricted funding would be so important for Elephants Alive. At the same time, Relate bracelets. I'm wearing them over here. We've got Relate bracelets for our elephant projects, our bee projects, and we've even got for our Goggle project, which I'll just mention very briefly, is an amazing initiative that Michelle has started with Elephants Alive, where goggos or grannies from the surrounding communities get brought into the reserve to see elephants for often the first time. And they're the storytellers, and the whole ethos is when the wise meet the wise. And so I think that's the most amazing project, where these grannies are in tears when they're meeting elephants for the first time and learn from our trackers all about them. So Relate bracelets, that's also on our website. That funding goes there. So we do have these funding setups. And I can promise you, as a staff member, that the funds do come to Elephants Alive, which is really important. So yes, I think that we're in the rebuilding stage from COVID for sure. And all that sort of support would be amazing.
I love that idea of matriarchs supporting matriarchs in the project. I think that's absolutely wonderful. We've got another question coming through, and they're asking, how much is it to sponsor a hive?
So we have, I'm going to have to talk in rands, but hopefully that can be converted. So we've got two forms of hives that we use. There is the cheaper version, which is the wooden hive. It's 1,200 Rand. And that's almost a catcher hive. It's got 6 frames, small colony, but it's designed to hang in a tree. And we put those closer to the roads. It's quite a nice, natural-looking hive. And so if a tourist drives past, they see that. And so the 1,200 Rand one is that. And then we've got a very fancy hive called a bee pack hive. That's 5,500 Rand. And this hive's just incredible in that it's actually built out of insulating material, which, as you can imagine, here in South Africa, it gets really hot in summer. And when you've got insulated material around your hive, your bees have to spend less time inside trying to cool it down, and they can spend more time outside collecting pollen and nectar and making honey. So these hives last longer. They're certainly the most ideal one for this project setup. And yeah, that's 5,500.
And could you even tailor it? I mean, you were saying that you've got nice bees and naughty bees. Could you tailor the hives to your personality or to a friend's personality?
I wish I could. I learned through hard experience. Put them out, and then within a month or so, I've worked out if this is a bit of a nightmare or if this is a really sweet one. And some change. We had an event where I'll tell the story very quickly. We had a hive, which was the first tree to actually be impacted by an elephant that had a beehive in it. An elephant came on the other side and pulled for brush. The brown family, thinking, oh, you're not really that aggressive, are you? You let the elephant come right to your tree. And then we had an incident where I brought sponsors out to Brown family, thinking they're this very relaxed hive. And I didn't realize the one sponsor had cream all over her hands, and the bees did not take to this cream at all. So they went straight for her and stung her hand. So the rest of us jumped into our suits to try and start protecting ourselves, but this colony just lost it. So we got into our suits. I bolted because I was actually the only one who didn't have a suit. I was going to be photographer for the day. And then I watched this bizarre scene where Ronnie, my colleague in the field, was busy running. And if you see my fingers hopping like that, with the two ladies behind hopping as well. And I could not work out what was going on. And it turns out poor Ronnie had bees in his boots. So he was jumping all over, getting stung. And the poor ladies just were doing whatever they see their guide doing. And so they just started hopping about with Ronnie, not understanding why. They jumped into the vehicle. Ronnie shot off, and I just watched this colony following them. So the vehicle goes down the road. I walk to the road and trying to work out what's going on. What am I going to do next? And next thing, the vehicle comes hurtling back with the bees after them, and they bumped into Rhino on the road itself. So they had to turn around, zoot that way. We get to the end. And to this day, this was 2016, 17, to this day, that colony is a nightmare. So they just changed like that and do not like humans whatsoever. So I say, yeah, they're tricky. You're not quite sure what you're going to get.
Fair enough. Okay, that's a great story. I'm glad I asked that question. I've also just did a quick Google search, and people watching back home, if you're trying to work out what 5,500 is rand into dollars, it's around about $370. So that will give you a bit of an idea of what you're looking at there. Okay, Robin, I've only got one more question left. If you're watching back home and you want to put a question to Robin, now's your chance to do so. Just pop it in the comments section and I will read it to him. Again, thank you so much for all the lovely comments that you've been given throughout this conversation. It's really appreciated, and it's really nice to get the support. So Robin, I always like to try and end things on a bit of a positive note. So I'm just wondering what your favorite success story is.
My favorite success story, there's probably two of them related to the bee project. I think the first one was the night we hung all the hives. And what made that special was it was my master's project, and we had about a year of planning. And you have those nights where you're lying in bed thinking, this is never going to happen. It's just too big. How can we put 50 hives in the Kruger Park system? And I'm never going to finish my master's. And I think that first night when everything was hung, it only started at 10 p.m. So when working with bees, you only do it at nighttime when you're moving them about. So we worked in the big 5 bush from 10 p.m. until 5 a.m. the next morning. And then the following day, I came and I did my first inspection of the hives. And I think that feeling, it was like goosebumps, because I was just watching literally Marula trees with bees in them. And I thought, it's actually real. Like, this project's actually come to life. So I think for all the planning, we literally built the hives ourselves in the beginning. It really was special to have the project set up. And then I think the next one would be our 5-year anniversary, because the project was set up and I never thought it would last that long, that we're still busy protecting those same trees. After 5 years, we've only lost 6% of those trees versus 32% of the trees without bees. So to see the results after so long, to celebrate those 5 years, and on top of that, to be selling honey, wax products. The honey is used for treating wildlife with wounds as well, with one of the vets, Dr. Joel Elvis. So to actually see the project has grown from just a master's to an actual success story, I think those two stand out for me without a doubt.
I love that. And we've got a comment coming through from Stephanie Levy, and she's saying that she's a tour operator in the USA. Can they include a visit if people are elephant or conservation enthusiasts?
So I think they can most certainly contact us. And then speaking with Dr. Michelle Henley, we can certainly look at how people can get involved with the elephant-related research, not just certainly on the bee side, but we have so many projects that I think it really can be tailored to how people want to be involved. So I think if they contact, I don't know if you're able to show my the email address. It was on the finals slide, but they're welcome to contact, and we can then take things further.
Excellent, thank you. As we're talking, let me try and bring that up for you. But we have another question coming through asking what your advice would be for international non-African students wanting to get into conservation.
So there's a variety of good NGOs or let's say volunteer research organizations out our side. You, Kathleen, know of one, GVI. And I think that there's Transfrontier Africa as well. I think those ones, you get involved there, and it's lovely to then work for a group where you're doing research or volunteer research that actually is going towards there. Yeah, that's my email. Well, that's our email. That's actually going towards conservation management. So I think to look for these sort of NGOs or research groups, but then to be very clever when you're looking at them, make sure you do your background research, because you don't want to end up at one of these groups where they're sort of just taking your money and you're doing research and it might not actually be going anywhere. So I think just do your background research first, and then it's really going to expose you to what life is like here in Africa or South Africa, what it's like to be a field-based researcher / scientist versus just the more academic side of things, because I can promise you a lot of what we learn at varsity doesn't apply out here, and a lot of what you learn here you never learned at varsity. So I think it's really good to get that field experience, because you learn so much on the go. You deal with various stakeholders. You learn just how important human relations are in conservation. It's not all the Lion King and wildlife. There's the people aspect, which is extremely important. So yeah, I would, to sum it up, do your research, make sure you're going to a legit organization, and that way you start making connections.
Yeah, I completely agree. Unfortunately, there are some organizations that promote themselves as conservation and they're actually not. So I completely agree with Robin. Please do your research beforehand. You can also always get in touch with myself, and I'm happy to let you know any background on other organisations. Okay, I'm going to take one more question, and that's from Winnie, and she's asking, Uganda is having similar problems with elephants raiding their crops. She has suggested beehives around their fields. Do you think that that would help them in Uganda? Do they have the same bees there?
I would think so. I'm not 100% sure on which species is occurring in Uganda, but honeybees in general are an aggressive group or family of family species. So I would look at Dr. Lucy King's website, say the Elephants and Bees Project. That's what it's called, elephantsandbeesproject.com. And you will see Dr. King's beehive manual there. And it takes you from the start how to build a beehive fence around your fields. You obviously want to look at the size. You can't have a fence that stretches kilometers and kilometers. It's just not manageable. But if it's a certain area that needs to be protected, it's with some human power, it's really not that difficult to set up a fence line, and then you get your bees in. And as long as you've trained the community in beekeeping and looking after their bees, you really get standout individuals. And I can attest to this from my Sri Lanka days. You really find people who've never dealt with bees before suddenly become natural beekeepers. They just didn't know it. And so I would certainly look into Dr. King's website to take that further.
And kind of following a bit on that, does this also then, I guess, provide employment opportunities to the locals in the area to be looking after these bees and that kind of thing?
Certainly, employment, and it's the honey. So it's elephant-friendly honey, which I think is an amazing marketing tool for a community to use. And we certainly are using that for our Bees and Trees project. So it's natural honey coming from the system. And then I know in Kenya, for example, it works really well where the NGOs are buying the honey from the community. And in Lucy's papers, she even speaks about community members using some of the profits to extend their fence lines. So certainly there's a marketing and a employment aspect to it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Robin. I've absolutely loved having you on. It's been a really interesting chat. And you've been making a lot of people giggle as well with your stories of the bees. So yeah, lots of lovely feedback coming through. Is there anything that you want to finish with before we say goodbye?
Well, firstly, to say thank you to you for this opportunity. I really love telling the stories from the field because sometimes they happen to us as small staff team. And it's really great to let others know what we're going through. We're very lucky to work for Elephants Alive. It's an amazing NGO. It's a small team that carries or punches far beyond their weight. And so I would just like to encourage people to look into Elephants Alive, see the research they're doing. It's amazing when you can have a team of trackers and scientists and community members working together for a common cause. And this is why I say when you're doing your research on NGOs, really look into them because there are some really lovely ones out there. And I think I'm very privileged to work for one of them. And I'm very proud of the work that we've accomplished as a team of 8 or 9 staff members. I think it's amazing to have so many collared elephants. And I think what we are lucky is to work with species like elephants that teach us so much. They really have amazing, I talk about bee personalities. The elephants are another whole level. And we really get to know them when they've got collars on and you're seeing them every week in the bush. And you're learning who the rascals, who the old boys, who are the tricky cows. You really do. We work with special animals. And so I'm very happy to be able to share these stories with your audience.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm very jealous of your job. Maybe not so much running from bees, but the rest of it sounds absolutely fascinating. So thank you for coming on and sharing your stories. And as I said, if you're watching this back home and it's not live, you can still put a question to Robin and then one of us will try and get back to you as soon as possible. Just post it in the comments section. Again, please do like, comment, share these videos. The more people who see it, the more awareness we can raise. And if you've enjoyed this one, then please do come and find us on What Does the Giraffe Say Media on Facebook, where we've got lots of previous interviews and lots of fascinating ones coming up. So thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in and enjoy the rest of your day.